In early 1943, the war was at a tipping point. The Allies, after a bloody and brutal campaign, had finally defeated the German Afrika Korps in North Africa. For the first time, German field marshals had surrendered. The southern belly of Europe was exposed. The question hanging over London and Washington was not if they would invade, but where. The answer was painfully, terrifyingly obvious. Anyone with a map could see it. The shortest, most logical, most strategically vital target was the island of Sicily. Capturing Sicily would shatter the Axis control of the Mediterranean, open the seaway to the Middle East, and provide the perfect stepping stone for a future invasion of mainland Italy. It was the perfect target, and that was the exact problem. Winston Churchill, in a secret memo, wrote that everyone but a bloody fool would know it was Sicily, and the Allies knew that the Germans were not bloody fools. The German High Command, the OKW, was fully aware of the threat. They were already moving elite Panzer divisions, like the Hermann Göring Division, to Sicily. They were reinforcing the beaches, building concrete pillboxes, and pre-sighting their artillery on the exact landing zones the Allies would have to use. If the Allies invaded Sicily as planned, it would be a massacre. The Germans would be waiting for them. It would be a bloodbath on a scale that would make D-Day look easy. The Allies were trapped by their own simple, inescapable logic. They had to invade Sicily. But they could only invade Sicily if they could somehow convince Adolf Hitler that they were actually invading somewhere else. This was the greatest strategic deception problem of the entire war. The solution would not come from a general. It would not be won by a tank division or a naval armada. It would be won by a small, secretive group of intelligence officers in London, working from a damp, windowless basement known as Room 13. And their plan was pure, ghoulish, macabre genius. It was a plan so bizarre, so theatrical, and so utterly insane that it would require the perfect team, a brilliant, eccentric intelligence officer, a meticulous naval attaché, a fast-driving female MI5 agent, and a world-famous aristocratic coroner. And most importantly, it would require a secret agent who was already dead. This was the story of Operation Mincemeat. The plan was born from a document so strange it sounds like fiction. It was a memo written by a naval intelligence officer named Ian Fleming, the man who would one day create James Bond. The memo was a wild, almost absurd list of ideas for deceiving the enemy. It was nicknamed the Trout Memo because it compared tricking the enemy to fly fishing, dangling different attractive lures until the enemy bites. Idea number 28 on that list was titled, quote, "A Man Who Never Was." The idea was simple. You take a dead body, you dress it in the uniform of an officer, you plant false, high-level documents on it, and then you dump it from a submarine off the enemy coast, making it look like an officer killed in a plane crash. It was a brilliant, ghoulish, and completely theatrical idea. In 1939, it was dismissed as unworkable. But now, in 1943, with the Allies facing a massacre in Sicily, the unworkable idea was pulled from the files. The mission was given to two very different and very brilliant men. The first was Ewan Montague, a sharp, methodical, and aristocratic naval intelligence officer. He was a King's Counsel, a high-level lawyer in civilian life. He would be the operations director, the man who would handle the complex legal and logistical problems. The second was Charles Cholmondeley, an eccentric, young, and wildly imaginative RAF intelligence officer. He was the ideas man, the mad genius who had been obsessed with the dead body plot for months. Their partnership was perfect. Cholmondeley Lee had the crazy ideas. Montague figured out how to make them work. They set up their operation in Room 3, a cold, secure, windowless basement room, deep in the Admiralty building, and they immediately faced their first and most gruesome, impossible problem. They needed a body. This was not a simple task. They couldn't just get a body. They needed a specific kind of body. They needed the body of a man who had not died a violent death. There could be no stab wounds, no bullet holes, no broken bones that a German autopsy would instantly flag as suspicious. But he also had to look like he had died from drowning or from exposure after a plane crash. And most critically, they needed a body that no one would ever claim. No family, no friends, no one to post a missing persons ad in the paper that a German agent in London might see. They needed a ghost, a man who never was. Montague, using his high-level legal connections, turned to one of the most famous and respected men in England, Sir Bernard Spilsbury, the Home Office pathologist. He was the father of modern forensics, a man who had personally performed thousands of autopsies. Spilsbury was their technical advisor on death. He confirmed their fears. Their mission was on a clock. A dead body decomposes. They could not use a body that was obviously old. And he warned them that a German coroner would be looking for one. Simple thing. The cause of death. He told them their best chance, their only chance, was to find a man who had died from pneumonia. Why? Because pneumonia fills the lungs with fluid. And when a body with fluid-filled lungs is recovered from the sea, the autopsy, especially in 1943, would look almost identical to a standard drowning. It was the perfect, undetectable cover for the cause of death. So now their task was even harder. They needed a man with no family, who had just died of pneumonia. Montague and Cholmondeley began a desperate, secret search of every morgue and hospital in London. And then, in January 1943, they got a call from the coroner at St. Pancras Hospital. A man had just died, a 34-year-old homeless, transient man. His name was Glyndwr Michael. He had no family. No one had come to claim the body. He had been living on the streets, destitute, and in his weakened state, he had ingested a small amount of rat poison, which had led to a fatal case of chemical pneumonia. His lungs were full of fluid. This was him. This was their secret agent. Montague and Cholmondeley moved in. They convinced the coroner, in the name of national security, to release the body to them. They put Glyndwr Michael's body into a sealed metal container, packed it with blocks of dry ice, and secretly moved it to a secure, refrigerated meat locker in Hackney. They had their actor. Now, they had to build his legend. They had to give this man who never was a life. This was the true genius of Operation Mincemeat. The Germans were not just meant to find a body, they were meant to find a person. Ewan Montague and Charles Cholmondeley became, in essence, authors. They were writing the life story of a fictional man, and they had to do it with props. First, the name. They couldn't use a real officer's name, but they also couldn't just invent one. A name that appeared on no military list would be an instant red flag. So they found a perfect bureaucratic loophole. They looked in the official army list for a common name, Martin. They found several Captain Martins and Major Martins. They decided their man would be Captain, Acting Major William Martin of the Royal Marines. The rank was a masterpiece of social engineering. A captain was too junior to be carrying top-secret invasion plans. A general was so important that his death would be known to the Germans within an hour, and they would know the documents were a plant. But an acting major, that was the sweet spot. He was just important enough to be entrusted as a courier for a high-level letter, but just unimportant enough that his death in a plane crash would be plausible and wouldn't be public knowledge. He was the perfect, anonymous, believable agent. Now they had to give Major Martin a life. Montague and his team went to work creating what is known in the spy trade as pocket litter. They were building a human being from the contents of his wallet. They decided Major Martin needed a fiancée. A fictional MI5 secretary, Pam, was chosen for the role, and she provided a beautiful, real photograph of herself. Then they wrote the love letters. Montague and his team spent hours drafting and redrafting passionate, slightly breathless letters from Pam to her darling Bill. They were not just "I love you" notes, they were real. They mentioned a small argument they'd had. They talked about their post-war plans. They were intimate and slightly tear-stained. But a German intelligence officer would be suspicious of just letters. He would look for proof. So the team went to a London jeweler, and they bought a real, high-quality diamond engagement ring. And then they got a receipt for it. They didn't pay in cash. They had the jeweler draw up a receipt for Major William Martin, who was paying in installments. This was genius. It added another crucial layer to his personality. Major Martin was so in love that he was living slightly beyond his means. To reinforce this, they added more flaws. They created a bill from his tailor. It was an angry letter from Jeeves and Hawkes, stating that his officer's uniform bill was overdue. Then they got a letter from his bank manager at Lloyd's Bank, a stern, official letter, warning Major Martin that he had an overdraft of £79. They also created a letter from his father. It was a classic, stiff upper lip letter from a wealthy, disappointed father who was refusing to pay the overdraft and lecturing his son on his irresponsibility. A German analyst, looking at this, would not see a sterile, perfect secret agent. He would see a real man, a man who was a bit of a romantic, a bit irresponsible with money, and who was in a spat with his father. He was believable. Finally, they added the ephemera of life. They put a stub from a London theatre ticket in his pocket to prove he had just been in London. They added a book of stamps, a set of keys, and a few loose coins and receipts. He was now William Martin. But all of this was just the wrapping paper for the present. The present was the top secret documents. This was the most critical part. The documents had to be perfect. They had to be so authentic that they would fool the most skeptical German general. Montague couldn't just write the letter. It had to come from the very top. He went to General Sir Archibald Nye, the Vice Chief of the Imperial General Staff. Nye, a brilliant staff officer, personally drafted the official letter. It was a formal military letter, addressed not to a stranger, but "Dear Alex." General Harold Alexander, the Allied commander in North Africa. The letter was a masterpiece of misdirection. It casually mentioned that the Allies were planning 2 invasions. The main invasion, Operation Husky, it said, was aimed at Greece. A secondary cover invasion was aimed at Sardinia. And then it contained the poison pill. General Nye casually mentioned that they were also planning a sham or a feint operation against Sicily, just to mislead the enemy. It was the entire, real invasion plan, dismissed as a sham. To make it even more believable, the letter was written by hand by General Nye himself, and he signed it. This was not a forgery. It was a real signed document from the second highest ranking officer in the British Army. But one letter was not enough. They needed a second personal touch. They got Lord Louis Mountbatten, the Chief of Combined Operations, and a cousin of the King, to also write a letter. This one was addressed to Admiral Sir Andrew Cunningham, the commander of the Mediterranean Fleet. It was a chatty, informal, old boys network letter. In it, Mountbatten introduced his expert, Major Martin, who was, quote, a bit of a specialist in amphibious landings. He then, casually, made a joke about Sardinian sailors. Another subtle clue pointing away from Sicily. They now had the body, they had the legend, and they had the bait. All of it, the letters, the photos, the bills, was sealed in a black, official, top-secret briefcase, which was then chained to the wrist of Major William Martin. The man who never was finally ready for his mission. The final, critical problem was delivery. How exactly do you transport a decomposing human body, packed in dry ice, across hundreds of miles of war-torn Europe, and then dump it in the ocean without anyone noticing? The plan was incredibly high risk. The body of Major Martin was sealed in a special airtight steel canister, which was filled with dry ice to keep it perfectly preserved. The canister was labelled "Handle with care, optical instruments." This canister was then loaded onto a truck in total secrecy and driven by Charles Cholmondeley himself through the night to a naval base in Scotland. There, it was loaded onto the Royal Navy submarine HMS Seraph. The submarine's commander, Lieutenant Bill Jewell, was given his orders. He was told he was carrying a top-secret meteorological device that was to be deployed in the ocean off the coast of Spain. Only Lieutenant Jewell, and no one else on his crew, knew what was really inside that steel canister. His crew, for the entire, agonizing 10-day voyage, had to live, sleep, and eat, crammed into the tiny submarine, right next to this large, mysterious metal tube that was lashed to the deck of the control room. The crew of the Seraph developed a dark, gallows humor joke about their passenger. They nicknamed the canister Wee Willie. The choice of where to dump the body was just as critical as the body itself. It could not be dumped off the coast of Greece. That was too obvious. It had to be found somewhere plausible. Ewan Montague and his team chose the coast of Huelva, Spain. This was another stroke of genius. Spain was officially neutral, but its fascist government, under General Franco, was crawling with German Abwehr, or Secret Service, agents. And crucially, Huelva had one of the most famously pro-German, hyperactive, and very efficient Abwehr agents on the entire coast, a man named Adolf Klaus. The British knew that if a body washed up on that beach, it would be in Adolf Klaus's hands within hours. On April 30th, 1943, after 10 days at sea, the HMS Seraph surfaced in the dark, just off the coast of Huelva. The timing was perfect. The tide was coming in. Lieutenant Jewell ordered his officers, who were all now brought in on the secret, onto the deck. The crew was ordered to stay below, for security reasons. In the cold, pre-dawn darkness, on the pitching deck of the submarine, the officers unsealed the canister. What happened next was a moment of grim, almost religious theatre. The dry ice evaporated in a cloud of white, roiling fog. Ewan Montagu and his team had insisted that the body, Major Martin, could not just be dumped. He was an officer. He had to be treated with respect. Lieutenant Jewell, standing on the deck, opened his prayer book, and as his officers gently, respectfully, slid the body of Glyndwr Michael into the Atlantic, Jewell read, aloud, the 39th Psalm. I will keep my mouth as it were with a bridle. Lord, let me know mine end and the number of my days. For I am a stranger with thee, and a sojourner, as all my fathers were. The body of Major William Martin, his briefcase still chained to his wrist, floated away on the incoming tide. The submarine sank back beneath the waves, its mission complete. Now, there was only silence. Back in room 13 in London, Montagu and Cholmondeley waited. Their part was over. The man who never was now in the hands of the ocean and the Germans. Had it worked? Had they been too clever? Would the body even be found? Or would it just sink, lost forever, the entire brilliant, ghoulish plan? A complete failure. The wait was agonizing. The tension in London was unbearable, but they did not have to wait long. At 7:30 a.m. on the morning of April 30th, just hours after the Seraph had submerged, the body of Major William Martin was found. He was discovered floating in the surf by a local Spanish fisherman named Jose Antonio Rey Maria. The fisherman, seeing the waterlogged, uniformed body of an Allied officer, immediately reported it to the local authorities. The Spanish military, the Infanteria de Marina, took custody of the body, and this is where the neutrality of Spain became the most critical factor. The Spanish, under General Franco, were officially neutral, but their leadership was fascist and deeply pro-German. The British, meanwhile, were their allies on paper. This created a delicate, two-faced game. The Spanish authorities, seeing the top-secret briefcase chained to the officer's wrist, knew they had something explosive. They immediately contacted the local German consul, who was, just as Montagu had planned, the Abwehr agent, Adolf Klaus. At the exact same time, the British naval attaché in Spain, who had been secretly briefed on the operation, launched a frantic diplomatic effort. He sent top-secret, urgent telegrams to the Spanish government in Madrid, demanding the immediate return of the briefcase. He explained that Major Martin was a vital courier, that the briefcase contained documents of the utmost secrecy, and that its loss was a catastrophe for the British war effort. This was the second bite of the lure. If the British had ignored the body, the Germans might have suspected it was a plant. Why would they not try to recover top-secret documents? But because the British were acting desperate, because they were kicking up a massive high-level diplomatic fuss, the Germans were convinced the briefcase must be real. Now, a delicate, almost comical, three-way shell game began. The Spanish, caught in the middle, wanted to please both sides. They wanted to officially return the briefcase to the British to maintain their neutrality. But they also wanted to unofficially help their friends, the Germans. So they did what Montagu had bet his entire career they would do. They delayed. They performed a very slow, very respectful Spanish autopsy on Major Martin. The Spanish coroner, just as Sir Bernard Spilsbury had predicted, found the man's lungs were full of fluid. He officially declared the cause of death to be asphyxiation due to immersion in the sea. The pneumonia was never even detected. The cover story was perfect. While the body was being processed, the briefcase was in the hands of the Spanish secret police. Adolf Klaus, the German Abwehr agent, was frantic. He needed to see what was inside. He convinced the Spanish officers to help him just for a few hours. The Spanish, in a secret backroom deal, loaned the briefcase to Klaus. The Germans, knowing they were on a clock, took the briefcase. They could not break the chain, so they broke the lock. They carefully, expertly, steamed open the top-secret envelopes, which had been sealed with official wax. They photographed every single document, the official letter from General Nye, the chatty letter from Lord Mountbatten, the love letters from Pam, the bank overdraft, the engagement ring receipt. They photographed everything. Then, in a display of remarkable, if flawed technical skill, they reinserted the documents. They resealed the envelopes using forged wax seals, and they put a new, identical lock on the briefcase. A few days later, the Spanish government officially handed the briefcase over to the relieved British naval attaché, claiming, with a straight face, that it had never been touched, and that Spanish honor had protected it. The briefcase was raced back to London, to room 13, where forensic scientists were waiting. They examined the envelopes, and they found the truth. The fibers of the paper were disturbed. The wax seals were not the originals. Montague had his confirmation. The Germans had not just found the present, they had opened it. The bait was taken. Now the photographed documents were raced via German diplomatic bag from Spain to Berlin. They were placed on the desk of Adolf Hitler. The documents, now photographed and translated, arrived at the Führer headquarters in Berlin. They landed on the desk of the OKW, the German High Command. This was the moment of truth. German intelligence was not stupid. They were, in fact, highly professional and deeply skeptical. Their first default assumption was that any found document was a British plant. The German High Command was split. Several generals, including General Jodl, were suspicious. The coincidence of a high-level courier with all the plans just washing up on a beach was too convenient. But then they looked at the rest of the photographs. They didn't just see the official letters. They saw the life of Major William Martin. They saw the passionate, tear-stained love letters from Pam. They saw the receipt for the diamond engagement ring. They saw the angry, overdue bill from his London tailor. And most of all, they saw the stern, disappointed father letter and the bank manager's letter warning Major Martin about his overdraft. This was the flaw that made the entire story perfect. The German analysts, in their cold, logical assessment, concluded no intelligence service, especially the stiff upper-lip British, would be so unprofessional as to invent a flawed secret agent. They would not invent an agent who was irresponsible, who was in debt, and who was bad with money. This man had to be real. The sheer, embarrassing personal messiness of his life was the ultimate proof of his authenticity. The bait was not just taken, it was swallowed, whole. The final report was sent to Adolf Hitler himself. Hitler, a man who famously played on intuition and distrusted his own generals, seized on the documents. This was exactly what he wanted to hear. He had long suspected the Allies would attack in the Balkans, in Greece, to link up with the Red Army. The Mincemeat documents didn't just trick Hitler. They confirmed his own, flawed, pre-existing bias. He declared, on May 14th, that the measures to be taken in regard to Sardinia and the Peloponnese take precedence over everything else. The order was given. The man who never was had just, from his grave, changed the entire map of the war. The OKW began a massive, frantic redeployment of its most elite forces away from Sicily. General Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox himself, was pulled from the Russian front and sent to Athens to form a new Army Group E to defend the Balkans from the imminent Allied invasion. 2 elite panzer divisions were ordered to move to Greece immediately. At the same time, the 1st Panzer Division, Hermann Göring, one of the Wehrmacht's most powerful armoured units, which was already in Sicily, was ordered to leave Sicily and move to Sardinia to defend against the secondary invasion. Finally, torpedo boats, R-boats, and mine-laying vessels were all rerouted from Sicilian waters and sent to patrol the Greek islands. The Germans were, quite literally, emptying the fortress of Sicily and moving all of their best soldiers to the exact places the fake letters had told them to. In Room 13 in London, Montagu and Cholmondeley were now receiving a flood of Ultra intercepts. Ultra was the code name for the intelligence gathered from the Enigma machine, the unbreakable German code machine, which the British had in fact broken. They were, in real time, reading the secret, encrypted German messages, confirming Hitler's orders. They were reading reports from German generals in Greece, complaining that the imminent invasion had not yet arrived. They were reading, with what must have been sheer giddy disbelief, that their crazy, ghoulish, theatrical plan had worked. It had worked perfectly. The man who never was a complete success. The stage was now set. The Germans were staring, with all their best troops, at Greece and Sardinia. And on the night of July the 9th, 1943, a massive Allied armada of 2,590 ships, carrying 160,000 men and 14,000 vehicles, steamed unopposed toward the real target, the undefended southern beaches of Sicily. When the first Allied landing craft hit the beaches of Sicily, the men inside, part of Operation Husky, were braced for hell. They were expecting the full Gallipoli, a wall of machine gun fire, pre-sighted artillery, and panzer divisions waiting for them on the beaches. And instead, they found, in many sectors, almost nothing. The invasion, the largest amphibious operation of the entire war to that point, was a stunning, almost anticlimactic success. The German defenders were, just as Montagu had planned, looking the wrong way. The elite panzer divisions, like the Hermann Göring, which should have been waiting on the beaches to counterattack, were instead on the other side of the island. Or, even worse, they were sitting uselessly on the island of Sardinia. The elite paratroopers and panzer grenadiers who should have been manning the bunkers were in Greece. The German OKW was caught so completely by surprise that it took them almost 2 full days to even accept that Sicily was the real invasion. For the first critical 48 hours, the German High Command in Berlin was convinced that Sicily landing itself was the feint. They were still waiting for the real invasion, the one Major Martin's letters had promised in Greece. This 48-hour delay, brought by the man who never was the single most critical gift of the entire operation. It gave the Allies just enough time to land over 150,000 men, thousands of vehicles, and tons of supplies, and to establish a secure, unshakable beachhead. When the German panzer divisions were finally, frantically, rerouted from Sardinia and the other side of Sicily, it was too late. The Allies were ashore. The battle for Sicily was now a land campaign, not a beach landing massacre. The battle itself was still brutal. The Germans, once they realized they had been tricked, fought with their usual tenacity. But the strategic victory was already won. Sicily fell in just 38 days. The path to Italy was now open. Benito Mussolini, the Italian dictator, was deposed by his own government just 2 weeks after the landings, a direct consequence of the invasion's success. The soft underbelly of Europe had been ripped open, and the cost? The Allied command, in their most optimistic best-case scenarios, had prepared for catastrophic casualties. They had estimated over 10,000 men killed and 30,000 wounded just to take the beaches. Thanks to Major Martin, the actual casualties for the entire 38-day campaign were less than a third of that. Back in London, Ewan Montagu received a simple, coded telegram from General Alexander, the commander in North Africa, who had just led the fake invasion. The telegram read, "Mincemeat swallowed rod, line and sinker." The operation was a perfect 100% success. The story, however, was not quite over. There was one last poignant detail. After the body of Major Martin had been returned to the British, he was given a full military burial with honours in the Spanish cemetery in Huelva. The British government even paid for a custom, ornate headstone. It was engraved, William Martin, born 29th March 1907, died 4th April 1943, beloved son of John G. Martin and the late Antonia Martin of Cardiff, Wales. Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori. For 50 years, that grave was tended by the locals of Huelva, who saw it as the resting place of a brave Allied hero. But in 1996, the truth was finally officially declassified. The British government acknowledged that Major Martin was, in fact, Glyndwr Michael, the homeless, destitute Welshman who had died alone in a London hospital. His flaw, his anonymity, the fact that he was a man who never was, whom no one would miss, had made him the one man in the world who could save 10 Sordiu lives. In a final act of respect, the British government added a new inscription to the tombstone, a postscript to one of the greatest deceptions in the history of warfare. It now reads, "Glyndwr Michael served as Major William Martin, R.M." And that concludes this story about Operation Mincemeat and the corpse that fooled the Third Reich. If you want to learn more about World War II, subscribe, like, and share. Also, leave your anecdotes and ideas in the comment section.